very honored to welcome retired Brigadier General David Irvine and a former Republican state legislator. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. Before I start, I would be grateful if the folks standing behind me would take those signs down while I'm speaking, because I don't feel quite comfortable as a military officer with that backdrop. Would you mind? Thank you very much. I'd like to begin my comments with an observation. We live in the reddest of red states. As a state, we are pro-life, pro-constitution, and pro-rule of law. Proposition: one cannot be all of these things and also be pro-torture and still sleep straight in bed at night. I understand there's a book signing today in Sandy, and while I suspect most of you will not be buying that book, I could not resist browsing its table of contents at Barnes & Noble. I was looking for two names, which I did not find. One was Major General Tony Taguba, who's a friend of mine. General Taguba was assigned to make the first investigation of the photographs at Abu Ghraib. What he found was a trail of breadcrumbs that led back up the chain of command. In his official report, General Taguba recommended that the scope of the investigation be expanded to determine how far up the chain of command responsibility might go for what had happened there. For his honesty and for making that recommendation, he was directed to retire. There is a retired Air Force 3-star in Boise who was also directed to retire for recommending that James Miller, the 2-star Army general who imported Guantanamo's interrogation techniques to Abu Ghraib, be court-martialed. I spent 3 hours at dinner with General Taguba several months ago, and I was riveted by what he told me. I begged him to consider writing a book. His answer was, particularly on today's occasion, interesting. He said, as a military officer, I believe it's inappropriate for me to make a profit for carrying out an order I was given. As a lawyer, I said, Tony, you could give all the proceeds to the Army Emergency Relief Fund, but he was unpersuaded. Another name missing from the index was that of Air Force Colonel Mo Davis. Colonel Davis was assigned to be the lead prosecutor for the Bush military commissions at Guantanamo. Colonel Davis resigned that assignment and retired after being directed to use evidence tainted by torture in the prosecutions of Guantanamo prisoners. Colonel Davis is but one of many JAGs who either defended Guantanamo prisoners or refused to use tainted evidence as prosecutors and paid for their integrity with their careers. What I did find in the index under interrogation was a citation to just 3 pages. Those 3 pages were, for me, revealing, first because all that the author had to say on that quite singular topic took only 3 pages. Second, because they show me that we as a society have moved beyond the dog ate my homework defense in junior high to a more sophisticated, my lawyer said it was okay defense in national security policy. In this sense, those pages are historic because the war crimes trials following World War II specifically rejected the reliance on counsel defense. As I read that slightly tortured rationale, I could not help thinking of the small group of civilian lawyers who gave the president permission to ignore settled law. They had 3 things in common. First, no military experience. Second, no law enforcement experience. And third, no interrogation experience. I also was reminded of the senior flag rank Judge Advocates General of all the uniformed services who had written letters of protest and memoranda against the abuse and torture of prisoners to then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld at the beginning of this unfortunate business. Their letters were all classified secret, lest the American public find out that these learned and experienced military officers believed that the interrogation policies of the Bush administration were violations of federal and international law. I'm here today to recommend some alternate reading to what's being signed and sold down south. And I'll try to hold this up without losing everything. The book that I'm recommending to you is Because It Is Wrong by Charles Freed. Professor Freed was President Ronald Reagan's Solicitor General, and his 200-page book is a lawyer's and philosopher's rebuttal to the 3 infamous pages I've mentioned. General Freed was quite blunt in a recent interview with Reuters. Quote, "I think that the Bush administration broke the law, and what they did was disgusting and terrible and degrading." End quote. In an interview with an Australian paper a week ago, Freed said, "The illegality of waterboarding isn't a close call, even though we have come to call it simulated drowning or enhanced interrogation. It has been a crime for decades. In the past, we have prosecuted American soldiers who engaged in the equivalent of waterboarding. We have also prosecuted German and Japanese commandants who ordered it. Some have even been executed," unquote. In 2007, General David Petraeus issued a directive to all forces in Iraq which said, "Some may argue that we would be more effective if we sanctioned torture or other expedient means to obtain information from the enemy. They would be wrong. Beyond the basic fact that such actions are illegal, history shows that they are also frequently neither useful nor necessary," unquote. These guys are hardly lefties, but they could not disagree more with former President Bush on this important point. I'll conclude by sharing what I believe is a brilliant analysis of where we now are by my favorite Supreme Court commentator, Dahlia Lithwick, who writes for Newsweek and Slate. On November 10th, she wrote, "President Barack Obama decided long ago that he would turn the page on prisoner abuse and other illegality connected to the Bush administration's war on terror. What he did not seem to understand, what he still seems not to appreciate, is that what was on that page would bleed through onto the next page and the page after that. There's no getting past torture. There is only getting comfortable with it. Torture is being held in reserve for the next president who persuades himself that it's not illegal after all. Eric Holder and Barack Obama have taken pains to tell the American people that waterboarding is illegal torture. So what? President Bush disagrees. The persistent failure to hold anyone accountable at any level for years of state-sanctioned abuse speaks louder than their words. What we choose to define as torture is now just another policy disagreement, like extending the Bush tax cuts or picking a caterer. If a nation is unable to decry something as always and deeply wrong, it has tacitly accepted it as sometimes and often right, or as President Bush now puts it, damn right. Doing nothing about torture is at this point pretty much the same as voting for it. We are all waterboarders now. Buy the book, Because It Is Wrong. It's a Reaganauts view of torture, wrong under any circumstances, period. If torture is really the panacea for cracking tough cases, why do we not incorporate it as a standard practice in our criminal justice system? Torture has not made us safer. It is unreliable. It's inconsistent with who we are. It's foreign to our values. It increases the danger to our troops. Since 2006, I've worked closely with a group of about 60 retired admirals and generals who have written and said exactly that. to Congress, to the current president, and to his predecessor, shortly to be signing books. The group has included former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, combat division commanders, a director for the National Security Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and senior judge advocates general. Our informal co-chairs are a former commander-in-chief of Central Command and a former commandant of the Marine Corps. This debate is not about who's a wuss on terror. It's about what makes the most sense for national security and upholding the Constitution. Thank you.